Januar, What Will It Take For Me to Leave, in Kat's translation. And next year we're publishing Loran's National Book Prize winning novel Rocket in Kat's translation. Marta Marta also recently won the National Book Prize of Malta. You can't stop Loran. And Marta Marta is an intergenerational novel about a group of women living under the same roof, all in their own way, battling oppression and patriarchy. And this house that they're living in is a mixture of a brothel, a convent, and a cabaret. So I'll be reading part of Kat's translation. Perched on a stool, wrapped in puncturing the tightly woven cloth laid out in front of her with a fat sewing needle, upwards and downwards, downwards and upwards, Dolores was passing the time doing what she liked best, embroidering. Every now and then, and every few red stitches, she would pick up the magnifying glass from the nearby table and inspect her work to see if she had done the stitches correctly. Dolores was beginning to lose her sight, but she wanted nothing more to do with the eye doctor, for fear he would bring up cataracts again, like he did the last time he came to visit. She had reproached him, declaring that no illness should be mentioned under her roof, unless she herself had permitted it, and the doctor had simply shrugged his shoulders and smiled, because it was clear that dear Madre Dolorosa was the one in charge here. The moment she heard the first deep-toned note of the bell, she lowered the square tray with the embroidered cloth onto the table and went over to the windows to let in the joyous peal of the Sunday morning bells. She rested her arms in her lap, closed her eyes, and let the chimes ignite a fervour in her heart, a shudder throughout her body. None of the other girls had mastered the art of ringing those bells the way Maria Assunta had learned to, thought Dolores. Finally, she had found the one girl who knew how to transport her back to childhood with her knelling, to a time when the ancient Sor Paolina would ring the bells in the convent of San Giuseppe, and to a time even before that, to the day she had heard the solemn toll of the morning bells for her father's soul, and understood that when death knocks, you must let her in. Thoughts of her father brought to mind the words of the Saint Teresa, which had become so much of her own that she knew them off by heart. So great was my father's love for me, and so great was my deception of him, that he could never believe that I was so wicked, and in this way I never fell out of favour in his eyes. Words that immediately conjured up another memory of the final warning her father had muttered into her ear on his deathbed. She would always say that the erratic words that had rattled out of her father's mouth before he took his final breath, words that wandered only a few paces from his shriveled lips to Dolores' ear, who at 14 was still a child, and had never before that day had the privilege of witnessing with her own eyes a person wrestle between life and death and lose, had stirred up something within her that had made her blush. She would say that, in the embarrassment that ensued immediately after, she had understood the meaning of her father's words. She had barely noticed his head droop slowly downwards and his chin come to rest on his breastbone, despite, according to her aunts, the audible click like of bone on bone heard by all those at his bedside. She had been standing nearest to him, and she was the only one who had not heard it. She swears that she could still hear him clattering away when someone close by had bent over to shut his eyes. There was no doubt in her mind that his chest had still been radiating warmth when a strong pair of hands grabbed her by the shoulders and entreated her to get up and leave the room. She obeyed, but not before casting one final look over her father's body, lying prostrate on his bed under a sheet. And she would bet money that she had glimpsed a bulge in the sheets, a suggestion of her father's erect manhood, and further proof that he had not yet departed this life entirely. Outside the room, the cold air stung her cheeks. It was there that it hit her that her father had died. She would always recount that in the moment before he passed, he, who throughout his life had held the entire family captive, starting with his mother and siblings to his wife and children, had banished those final 4 words with which he had freed his daughter from the plaguing sense of weakness that only a woman is capable of suffering, a torment she thought she would have to live with for the rest of her life. That evening, she felt a quickening like she had never experienced before. On the day of his death, a silence fell over her father's house for an hour, and then everyone set up about being busy. Up and down they went, oiling the sheets, scrubbing the stairs, cleaning the pots and pans, and pulling out half-forgotten linen from mothball-scented chests and the turret. She too got caught up in the frenzy, and yet the girl Dolores, her still red cheeks from the flush provoked by her father's words, rushed off and closed herself in her room. She always recalls her first coming like this. Go tell her saintly mother, God have mercy on her, that it was not to pray for her father's soul that Dolores had shut herself up in her bedroom in a hurry that day, but to indulge in wanton self-gratification with the help of, for the first time, a cigar that she had stowed safely away in the small drawer of the Sottosvecchio. For Dolores, it was the beginning of a guilt-free journey of sensual pleasure and enjoyment, in the spirit of her father's whispered cautions before his death. And although she was still a child, she was aware of how quickly her heart had started beating, and, like the pounding of her heart that day, the pealing of the bells was getting louder now, as one bell joined another, tolling faster and more zealously. Thank you.